I'm going to knit a Scottish heritage knitting pattern whilst travelling around Scotland. Hi, my name's Sophie and welcome to Sophie Knits Daily. Today I have a super exciting video that I'm going to start. I came up with the idea before coming into Scotland, knowing that I'd be coming here on my travels, that I'd love to create a Scottish heritage historical piece using Scottish yarn from a Scottish pattern designer whilst in Scotland. It gives me the chance to support local pattern designers and local yarn shops, and creating this piece myself is really going to kind of connect me with Scotland and the place that I'm travelling around. At the moment I'm on the north coast of Scotland and there is some incredible beaches here, like the beach that you can see behind me. I did not expect this of Scotland. I am really excited to do this kind of Scottish heritage knit whilst in Scotland, as it's going to be a perfect memento and souvenir of my trip. I first had to start with doing some research into Scottish heritage knitting styles, and there's 4 different styles that I came across. So the first one is Sanquhar knitting, which comes from a town called Sanquhar. The second one is Shetland lace knitting, where really intricate lace shawls were knitted in super fine lace weight yarn and wool, and these lace shawls were so fine that they could be passed through a wedding band. The other one is Fisherman's ganseys, which were produced in the fishing villages around Scotland. And the last one is Fair Isle. If you'd like to hear a bit more history about each of the different styles, I would love to go into more detail on another video. I have quite a lot of research behind that, so I definitely have some things to share. But the style that I went for my heritage piece is going to be Fair Isle. I was really drawn to all of the different colours in the Fair Isle pieces, and it's been a little while now since I've done a colour work item myself, so I'm very excited to get back into colour work. So a quick summary of Fair Isle. Fair Isle was developed on the island of Fair Isle. The island of Fair Isle is the smallest of the Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland. Fair Isle knitting is characterised by patterned colour work, using only 2 different colours on each row and an average of 4 different colours throughout a garment. Fair Isle is knitted in the round with only knit stitches, so no purling involved, and because of this, jumpers were steeked at the arm and the neckline to allow for the openings for the collar and the sleeves. Traditionally in Fair Isle, yarn is only carried as a float for a small number of stitches to kind of maintain the integrity of the knit. This was around 3 stitches, so yeah, not too many stitches each time. Traditionally, the bright coloured yarns in Fair Isle were dyed using plants forage from the island, like madder, and natural colours of the sheep were also used, giving the white, grey, brown and black contrast colours. Typically, Fair Isle pieces feature patterns that are reflective of nature and the landscapes and religion. So there's lots of crosses, ram's horns, hearts, flowers involved in the patterns for Fair Isle. In doing my research about Fair Isle, I found that there was some frustration from those on Fair Isle and in the Shetland Islands around the term Fair Isle. I think this is because a lot of people use the term Fair Isle when they really mean stranded colour work. Fair Isle is a very specific type of stranded colour work, but the term Fair Isle incorporates a really specific history and kind of technique that was developed on the island of Fair Isle. So the term should be reserved for those who kind of maintain and are aware of that history behind it. Because of this, I did struggle to find a pattern that I was confident was Fair Isle. I could see on Ravelry that lots of garments were described as being Fair Isle or named Fair Isle, or kind of appeared on the outset to be Fair Isle. But when I dug deeper into this, they really didn't have those very kind of specific rules as such of Fair Isle. So for example, they would hold 3 colours on a row rather than 2 colours, or the floats would be carried a really long way, or which isn't kind of typical of Fair Isle. So because I found it a bit difficult to find patterns, I would love to share some patterns with you if you want to produce your own Fair Isle garment, and this is kind of the process that I went through in finding the pattern that I ended up choosing. So the first pattern designer I found is Linda Shearer, who was brought up in the Shetland Island and has been teaching Fair Isle knitting for a long time. A pattern of hers that I really liked is the Hamar slipover. I really liked the combination of earthy greens and pinks in this slipover. The colour palette is completely what I am drawn to and my favourite colours. And I also really liked the diamond motifs throughout this fair isle piece. The only reason I didn't go for this piece for myself is I think it's a bit too complex a piece for my first fair isle garment, and I wanted a bit of a more beginner or introductory piece. Another pattern designer I found is Alison Rendall, who again was brought up on the Shetland Islands and has been producing fair isle knitting pieces for a long time. A pattern of hers I really like is the Buggiflooer headband. I really like the kind of bold, colourful flower design on this headband. I think it's just really fun and would really brighten up any outfit if you chose some bright colours for it. The thing that steered me away from this is the pattern recommends 8 different colours, and again I wanted to start with a piece that used a few different colours than that, because I knew a difficulty for me getting into fair isle pieces was going to be choosing my colour palette and picking colours to go together. She does say that she offers advice in the pattern for how to pick colours for this piece, as I think you pick a few similar colours that kind of blend into each other. But yeah, I didn't go for this piece in the end. I may use some of my leftover yarn to produce this piece in the future, but we'll wait and see. So the pattern that I did choose is the Hömin cowl by Terri Malcolmson. Terri is a knitter from the Shetland Islands who uses a traditional knitting belt to knit, which is exactly how fair isle pieces would have been knitted traditionally. Terri says in the pattern that the colourway was a collaboration between herself and her grandmother Wilma, who also produces Ravelry patterns and has been producing patterns for a very long time. So I really like that kind of family connection and the history and techniques of fair isle being passed down through generations. The cowl is made up of double corrugated rib on the top and bottom of the cowl. For the fair isle design, there's a wavy shape on the top and bottom, which if you look at it in a bit more detail, looks a bit like anchors. So an anchor right side up and then an anchor upside down, which again incorporates the kind of landscapes and kind of patterns of the island. And then in the middle of the cowl, there is a star motif, which reminds me of a quilt star motif, which I know is super trendy at the moment. I love the colours that she used in the cowl, and that's what really drew me in, but I do want to incorporate a few of my own favourite colours in there as well. I actually found that was somewhere I was kind of going wrong when looking at photos on Ravelry of the garments. I'm always really drawn into Ravelry photos where the sample is knit in a colour that I really, really like. And I had to tell myself with these fair isle garments to look at the patterns rather than the colour. I can very easily kind of change the colour for the fair isle garment and produce a garment in colours that I really, really love. And I think if you were to line up 10 of these cowls together in different colours, they would all look incredibly different. So I needed to really look at the pattern and kind of design of the fair isle rather than the colour, because it was the design that's kind of more important. You can change the colour but not the design very easily. So the yarn that I bought is Jamiesons and Smith 2-ply in 6 different colours. The pattern calls for Jamiesons of Shetland Spindrift, but the Jamiesons of Shetland and the Jamiesons and Smith are comparable and have the same specs. It's a bit confusing because they sound very similar, but they are 2 different companies. I was very grateful for the help of the owner in the Hand Spinner Having Fun shop for helping me pick out the colours for this fair isle piece. I kind of knew a colour palette that I wanted when I went into the shop, but I didn't really realise what went into picking colours for a fair isle piece. So some of the tips that she gave me was to pick colours that I like, but to also pick colours that are much brighter than what I'd usually go for. She said that once these brighter colours are incorporated into the knit, they provide a good amount of contrast that you'll be able to see the patterns well, but they also don't look so bright once all of the other colours are there. So that's something I had to keep in mind. I ended up picking my colours quite easily, but the hard part was choosing which colours to go where. Another tip that she gave me was to go through the pattern and to look at where you've got the biggest blocks of colour. So for example, in this pattern, the biggest blocks of colour is the white and the green that form the star motif in the middle. She said that this is where your kind of eye is going to be drawn most to, and the part that needs to provide the most contrast. So it's easier to start with the bigger blocks of colours and kind of work down to the smaller amounts of colours. So I've chose my colours. She's given me a bit of an idea of kind of how to work through the colours and which sort of colours to go where. I need to go away and have a think about exactly where I want my colours, and I will update you soon once I've done that. So it's a couple weeks later and I've been knitting away on this cowl. I'm currently in Edinburgh in a place called the Meadows, which is really beautiful. But if you can hear any kind of noise around me, it's because it's quite a busy park, but I thought it would be a perfect spot to film. I don't know if you can see, but Arthur's Seat is in the background, which we walked up the other day and is absolutely beautiful. And I can't wait to show you more of Edinburgh in a future video. But the last thing I spoke to you about is the colours that I was trying to decide where to put in the cowl. And my colours are pretty consistent with the colours that Terri Malcolmson uses in her pattern. So for the colours that match her colours, I've kept with the same theme. So for the green, I'm using 118 Moss, and instead of the white ivory colour, I'm using 2 grey brown. These are the colours that are in the kind of star motif in the middle of the cowl and are consistent with the colours that she uses, provide a good amount of contrast. The next 2 big sections of colour in Terri's cowl is the dark brown and the blue colour. Rather than dark brown and blue, I'm using 80 dark brown and 121 mix, which is a yellowy mustard colour. Again, I think provide a good amount of contrast. And in the cowl, a blue row is followed by a white row, which for me will be a yellow and a white, which I think look really pretty together and are a bit more kind of subtly dividing between the different colourwork sections. And finally, for the smaller amounts of colours in the cowl, I'm using copper, which is consistent with the red that Terri used in the pattern. And rather than the pink that she uses, I'm using 27 grey. And I'm really happy with how all of these colours look together. I've finished the double corrugated rib and the first 2 kind of motifs of the cowl. I'm about halfway through, so this is kind of repeated symmetrically. I'll talk you through the pattern. So the pattern is knitted completely in the round and it's recommended on 3mm needles. I'm using 3.5mm needles. I didn't do a gauge swatch as it is just a cowl and I could kind of tell my gauge from knitting up a section of the cowl, which would take me the same amount of time to do a gauge swatch, I suppose. But I decided to go 0.5 millimetre size up as I know that my knitting is tight and my colour work is normally tight and I'm meeting gauge with this, so I'm happy with that. The pattern is very, very simple. So all of the instructions and the colour work chart are all on one page, which is really, really helpful in not having to flick through and scroll through pages to find the colour work chart and then go back to the instructions. But it also means that the instructions are fairly simple, probably not for a beginner knitter, requires a bit more experience as she doesn't really walk you through the pattern, but there's definitely all the information there that you need to know to be able to create the cowl. I haven't struggled too much to kind of interpret the pattern, and the colour work is only in a chart. There's no written instructions for the colour work if that's kind of a preference for you. So this was my first time doing double corrugated rib and I am really, really happy with the outcome. I think it looks really, really pretty, and the fact she uses 3 different colours in the rib section is really beautiful. And then following the double corrugated rib, you do an increase round. So the increase round is where I had to think a little bit more about this pattern. She recommends you knit a certain amount of stitches and then do an increase, but she doesn't specify exactly what increase to use. I didn't want to do a leaning increase, so make one left or make one right, as I thought you'd be able to kind of tell that it's slanting. So I was trying to think about a increase that wouldn't slant so much, and I just went for it with the knit front and back. And I finished the round and I realised that there is a bar on that knit front and back that kind of looks like a pearl. I did a bit of research after doing this round, and the knit front and back is also called a bar increase. So the bar is kind of an ornamental feature of this increase. I don't hate it on the cowl, and I haven't undone my increase round and redid it with a different increase, as I think it kind of just blends in, and with blocking you won't really notice. It's just me being picky and I've noticed it myself. But I was quite intrigued on seeing if there was an increase stitch that didn't lean and didn't have a bar. I found a really extensive blog post by Nimble Needles where there's a list of lots of different knitted increases, the kind of pros and cons and features of these increases, and that's where I learned that the knit front and back has this ornamental bar. In the post there's some recommendations for doing an increase with kind of reducing this look of that bar, and one of these techniques is knit front and slip back. There is still a bar there, but the bar is kind of a bit more invisible or less visible. And the other increase stitch in this post that's recommended is the hitch knot increase. It's listed as being an increase that doesn't have a slant either way at all and looks very invisible. It's not an increase I'd come across before, but I'll link the blog post so you can see the instructions on how to do it if you're interested, because it's useful to have the photos to follow along to. But basically how you do this increase is you slip a stitch purlwise, you bring the entire stitch, so both legs of the stitch, over the left needle, you knit the first leg and drop that leg off, and then you knit a stitch through the second leg of that loop, and it forms a really beautiful increase. So it's something I might try in the future. I always love learning new techniques and skills, but as I said, I haven't undone it or done it on this project. It's just something to keep in mind. So for the Fair Isle section, I've been doing two-handed colour work, so continental and English style knitting at the same time, and I found that to be really an easy way for managing my yarn and not getting my yarn tangled. And the best thing about Fair Isle knitting is that you only use 2 colours per round, and the floats aren't very long at all, so I haven't had to catch any of my floats, and it's a really meditative experience once you get in the rhythm of doing the two-handed colour work. I've really enjoyed doing it. I've been a bit sad I put it on hold whilst I found the time to kind of film this update section, and I'm very excited to continue the cowl. I think it's going to fly off my needles now. Because there's so many different rounds of colour work, I don't think my kind of start and end of the round is very obvious. I don't think there's too obvious jumping of the colours. There is a slight bit of gapping. When I change to a round that uses 2 entirely different colours than the round before, there is a slight kind of gap that forms, and in the pattern there's recommendations for tying the ends together to close up this gap, or kind of weaving in the ends to close up this gap, but that isn't something I've done yet, so I'll see if that technique works once I've finished the cowl. A few comments on the yarn. The yarn is really beautiful to work with. It feels slightly rough, so I'm not sure how it's going to feel against my neck once it's kind of washed and blocked. Hopefully it will soften a bit with blocking, but actually working with the yarn is a dream. It's really elastic, it's really kind of nice on my hands, there's no tension in my hands, and the stitches look really even. You can tell this is a yarn that's designed for Fair Isle and colour work, as it just knits up so beautifully into a colour work piece. It's slightly rustic, so the stitches kind of stick together a little bit and kind of puff out together, and there isn't really any gapping. So yeah, I definitely recommend this yarn if you're getting into Fair Isle. A comment I didn't say about the two-handed colour work is that I've been holding my more dominant colour in my left hand on like the continental knitting side, and there isn't any recommendations in the pattern for which colour should be dominant, but I've been choosing the colour that I want to pop the most on that round. So be it the top of a triangular motif or the colour that's used less in that round. And I think this has really helped. You can definitely see a lot of definition in the different colour work motifs, and I think all the colours that I want to stand out are really standing out. So I'm going to continue knitting on this piece, and I'll give you an update soon with a finished cowl and my thoughts once it's all done and blocked. So my cowl is finally finished. It's only been about a week since my last update, and finishing this cowl has been so quick and enjoyable. I'm currently in Victoria Park in Glasgow. Having spent a few days in Glasgow, it's really nice here, and I definitely recommend a yarn shop called A Yarn Cake, where I was able to do a bit of knitting, but I'd already had my cowl finished at that point. I really love the look of this finished cowl. It is so fun and colourful. I love the way that all of the colours have come together and combined. I think probably from a bit more of a distance you can really see kind of the intricacies of the Fair Isle motifs. I absolutely love this star motif in the middle. It's definitely my favourite of the kind of two different motifs, and I think it'd be really nice to have a whole garment, vest or jumper or something using this motif. I haven't actually blocked this cowl yet, but I really wanted to finish the knitting whilst still in Scotland, and I'm heading to Ireland tomorrow, so I knew I desperately had to kind of film this segment and get it done, as it feels very authentically Scotland now that I've completely started and finished the project whilst in Scotland. But I will block this piece in the next few days and put some kind of clips here of what the finished blocked piece looks like and what it looks like on. I have tried it on pre-blocking, and I really like the way that it sits. It's probably a bit larger than I imagined, kind of width-wise. I haven't actually measured this, but the way that it actually sits on my neck feels really comfortable. It feels kind of really covering of my neck, and then it would be very warm at the sort of times that I'd need a cowl during the winter. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. I think it's colourful enough that it will really jazz up any outfit. I will make a few more comments on the actual pattern itself though. I said in the last segment that the pattern is very simple and definitely doesn't guide you through. You have to use kind of a bit of knowledge of your own to work this pattern, and I think that was more apparent with the second half of the pattern. There was a slight mistake with the decrease section, just a few of the row numbers were wrong, but it's kind of intuitive that you'll be doing the next row. So yeah, that was kind of fairly easy to recognise and understand and get past. The thing that I found kind of difficult about this pattern in the second half, similarly to the first half where it said in the pattern to do increases but didn't specify what increases, during the decrease section it did say to knit a certain number and then knit two together, and I know from using knit two together previously that this is a leaning decrease, and similarly to the increases, I didn't really want a decrease that was leaning or slanting in a certain direction. And I went back to Nimble Needle's blog post to find their big array of different knitted decreases, and from what I found on there really isn't a good solution for a non-leaning decrease. Most decreases do lean in a certain direction, so I decided to just stick with the knit two together decrease that's recommended in the pattern, and it does lean slightly, and I think if I look really hard at the decreases it is apparent, but I don't think it takes away anything from the pattern. I hope that with a block this is kind of going to puff up a bit and you won't really be able to see those lean decreases. But if you have any recommendations for decreases that I can use that don't lean a certain way, then I would be really grateful for that. The other part of the pattern that wasn't really very kind of specific was it said after the double corrugated rib section to just bind off, and I started doing the really classic bind off, so you knit two and pass one stitch over the other, and I found that because I'd done colour work on that previous row, the brown of the kind of knit in the rib section was really showing on that bind off round, and it didn't look exactly like my cast on round at the start. I feel on the cast on round you've got a very prominent section of white when you cast on before going into the colour work. So how I kind of rectified that is I did an additional knit round of just using the white, and then I did the bind off round, and I think that looks really good that way. I think it definitely does look more similar to the cast on, and I like that it is white all the way around that cast off round and doesn't have any of that brown showing through. I was really excited to cast off, but that isn't where I finished. As you'd expect with a colourwork piece, I had many ends to weave in. I think I had 50 plus ends, which was a lot of work and fairly difficult, or required a bit of thinking with the colour work. I didn't want to weave in any ends that would kind of show through to the right side. So I said in my last segment that on places where I'd started a new row with two entirely different colours, I had a little bit of gapping or some slight holes, and I've managed to close those holes up by tying the yarns together in a double knot. I don't know if this is really how you should do Fair Isle colour work, but it seems to have worked. So the last colour that I used on the previous row and the first colour of the next row, I've tied those two ends together and then weaved in the ends, and it really has closed that hole up. I think it does look pretty seamless now. I'll add in some closer clips so you can see, or hopefully not see, where the start of the round is. The other way that I've made the start of the round quite seamless is when weaving in my ends, I occasionally did duplicate stitching on the right side, and that was to make sure that the pattern lined up, like the motif lined up from the previous, and it was also to make some of the colours stand out that weren't really standing out. When I'd started a new round or joined a new bit of yarn, sometimes that very first stitch got lost. It was maybe pulled a bit tighter and didn't look very consistent with the previous stitches, so I've duplicate stitched over those ones to just make that first stitch stand out a bit more, and I think that looks really good. The duplicate stitches also helped when there's a slight jog when starting a new row. The duplicate stitch kind of makes that colour a bit more bold and covers that jog a little bit. So I'm very happy with that. And I think because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I wanted the inside of my cowl to look as pretty as the outside. So I took care, and this is so unnecessary, I took care when weaving in my ends to kind of weave in the direction that the floats were already going, so it all just kind of looks seamless. I know that you really won't see the inside of the cowl, but I know that it looks nice on the inside as well as the outside, and that just makes me happy. It doesn't take too much more work when weaving it in to just follow where that colour yarn is going, and yeah, I think it looks really pretty on the inside as well. I think this is a really beautiful souvenir piece of my trip to Scotland, and I'm really happy that I've made this as a little memento of Scotland. And I had so much enjoyment knitting on this Fair Isle piece. I found it really rhythmic and just very enjoyable that I've actually bought a little bit more yarn to make a second Fair Isle piece. Out of the 6 colours that I used to knit this cowl, I have a fair amount left over of each of them, and as I said in the first segment, I'd really like to knit the Buggiflooer headband by Alison Rendall, so I picked up another couple colours to hold with these 6, so I'd have the 8 colours that the pattern recommends. The 2 colours are in Jamieson's Shetland Spindrift. The one is in Thyme, which is a very mild greeny yellow colour, and the second is in Tundra, which is a orangey yellowy red kind of terracotta colour. Difficult one to describe. I picked up these 2 colours as I thought they kind of worked with the colour theme of my previous colours. I liked that the green was kind of a combination of the yellow and the green, and the red terracotta is a combination of, again, the yellow and the copper. So I think these 2 extra colours really do mix with the first colours very well. I'll keep you updated on how the progress of my Buggiflooer headband knits up in my podcast, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video on knitting a Scottish heritage knit in Scotland with Scottish yarn from a Scottish pattern designer. I think that's all of the Scotland bits involved. I'm heading to Ireland tomorrow, as I said, and I'd really like to continue this in Ireland. So stay tuned for an Ireland heritage knitting project vlog. I'm really excited to get started on that piece, not that I know what it will be yet. And yeah, I hope you've really enjoyed the video as much as I've enjoyed knitting and filming it. If you did enjoy this video, then consider liking and commenting or subscribing if you wish. And I hope to see you again shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye.